everybody's here. But this is the one time when you know you can come, you can network, you can see everybody, you can talk openly. I think that's very important.
And potential clients, and also to really understand where the sector is going and how we can support their challenges.
All the great and the good of the sector, so I can think and reflect on what I need to do to help our communities in the future.
Welcome back, everyone. You'll have worked out I'm not Steph. Steph's gone off to record Watchdog down in London, so you've got me for this session. I will not try and imitate Steph in any way at all. Certainly not the red high heels, although if you paid me, I might. What we've got now is, I think, a really interesting session that I think will keep you spellbound. We're going to start with an address from our president, Steve Frampton. Steve is a very colourful guy. I think he's got an enormous amount of energy. He's got fantastic passion for our sector. And I suspect he's going to do something just slightly different in the next 10 minutes or so. So if we can welcome Steve Frampton to the stage, please.
Welcome conference. We heard that word yesterday, didn't we? But I hope I'm going to be a bit more upbeat than that. And I'm going to start with some thank yous, really. Those of you who bet on whether I wore the hat or not, I wore it on and I've taken it off. So you can sort out whether you've won it or not. What I would like to do is I'd like to start with one or two thank yous because they're, firstly, I think, and you would want me to do this on your behalf, I'm certain. We would like to thank Alison for her year as president and the fact that she did an absolutely fantastic job. And if we are to believe what we heard yesterday, we might not have to redo English and maths for all of those young people and make them multiple failures. Well, that would be a fantastic outcome from that. So a huge thank you to Alison and every best wish on your retirement. Likewise, I think it gives us a chance also to pay tribute to another one of my predecessors. Because in June, of course, we launched this manifesto, and it's still really important to us today, isn't it, for our students. And of course, Ian led on that work all of that time ago. The afternoon's theme is around economic transformation. I'm just going to sort of just put a little bit about this. I was invited to go to the House of Lords to give evidence at a select committee on this, specifically around coastal communities. And one of the things I challenged them on, because they said there's a lack of aspiration in the sector, particularly in coastal communities. And I was very clear, no, that is not the case. I could give them examples in Weston, Bridgewater, Belfast, Exeter, Grimsby, Bournemouth, Poole, Birkenhead, Blackpool, Portsmouth, Weymouth, where in fact we are doing, and many others as well, where are doing fantastic jobs. And we heard that, didn't we, at the Helena Kennedy Foundation from those young people as well. We do amazing work, we are very transformational, and we can do that agenda if, of course, and the big if, of course, we get the resources to deal with this adequately. And what I'd like to do really is pay testimony to my colleagues and particularly the young people during that week for the amazing work that they did. So firstly, what about that then? Chesterfield and the Singing College. I mean, that was an amazing thing, I think, to do. Students from all over the country doing really amazing things. And of course, their principals and their governors as well. I think it's the first time collectively we've probably ever done anything like that. We can do it better and we need to go on doing that better. Leaders at the heart of their communities, delivering transformational change, improving economic productivity, and we ought to be celebrating that more. I think the thing that I was most impressed with was the fact that I met some students, and not just one or two groups, 3 or 4 minimum groups that had got up at 3 and 4 a.m. to travel with you down to London, from Middlesbrough, from Derwent, from Myerscroft, etc. And of course, many of you taking part in that march and doing fantastic work all around your communities to up the profile of our Love Our Colleges Week. I could give quite a few shouts out, but I'm going to pick one or two in particular, like Jerry for his inspirational closure of a college in London and giving everybody the opportunity to do that. It was, I think, the first time we'd ever taken such collective action, and we are going to need to if we're going to take it forward. I'd like to pay tribute, of course, to those students at a particular college in Hampshire, at Brockenhurst, who started that petition, and I'm going to come back to that later. That's unfinished business. We've got to finish the work of targeting the 100,000. And, of course, to those principals who did amazing things with their governors, sometimes managing to get ministers in for critical conversations like at Norwich and also here at BCOT. And to explain to you, we're far from finished on this. The one positive, perhaps, from the minister's speech yesterday was having the opportunity to talk to her PS outside. And we've been given very clear direction on what we need to do to take this strategy forward. So we'll be working with you in terms of targeting those colleges which have got direct relationships with MPs in Treasury or in marginal seats with ministers, where we can put increased pressure on and perhaps work with employers in those areas to see if we can secure what it is that we quite rightly deserve and need if we're going to be able to do our jobs properly. So that's about how we'll take it next. We need to do that in a very unified way nationally. We need to do it in a very unified way locally, and we need to do it regionally as well. And what a fantastic week that was. And we, like I say, we'll come back to the petition later on. We are also going. On the petition, we do need to get to that 100,000, and it's very, very, very important that we do. And I will come back to that later on. We also are going to need, if we're moving into a world of AI, we're going to need some significant investment in digital technology. And many of us have been very, very clear when we've been working with the department, we can and already do deliver this. There are outstanding examples in Harlow and BCOT and Portsmouth and the work that we're doing with JISC. But unless we're going to get the resource to do this, this is not going to be cheap, and it's going to be absolutely essential, especially if we're going to do this to deliver economic transformation in a fair and just way. We're going to need to work with our partners in a way that we haven't before, and I think that there's no better example of that actually than the partnership work that we've done with the NUS. For Sakura and Emily to be there on the day, for the NUS to actually make FE funding their key priority for the whole of this autumn term is something that we've never had before. We're much, much stronger together, and we're actually much, much stronger when we engage with students on the whole agenda around talking to them about what sort of curriculum, involving them in quality, involving them in the decision-making of colleges. And I think sometimes we've perhaps overemphasized the role of listening to employers. They're often very, very good at giving us the generic skills that we need to be working on. But actually, the young people themselves, and I'm talking of young people 7 and 8 and older, let alone by the time they get to work with us, who are very, very clear on the sort of experience that they want and the skills that they want to develop. And we're really looking forward to working with the NUS on that engagement strategy over time. I think this morning's hot topics were hugely successful, and there was one in particular that David and I attended that really links into this. I think the massive obligation that we've all got is to make sure we look after ourselves. It's very, very important that we get our own houses in order, we do look after ourselves, and we have the confidence to actually use the organisation. I mean, as a member, to use your organisation when there are signs of issues emerging, and my goodness, aren't there a number of those, so that we can help broker those conversations with the ESFA and also the FE Commissioner. That session this morning, I think, was really heartening for those of you who were there, because what we don't want to do is to find ourselves in the degree of difficulty that some colleagues have found themselves in recently with the inevitable consequences. And I think that means understanding some of the latest research as well. I mean, particularly, in Chris's book, I think, launched by Penny Mordaunt, the Minister, around the fact that diversity and inclusivity in leadership, and that involves working with young people and all the other agendas there, is going to give us the sort of leadership and the decision-making and the processes in colleges that our colleges are going to need going forward. I think the key skill in that not only is the digital literacy, but also the creativity. And if you want to give yourself an early Christmas present and a permission book, I can't recommend anything better than this. Chris was the world's first major independent comms and marketing company who decided to publish some research on this, really. He gave his company away, he took a year out to write the book. What he does is encourages us to say creativity is the key skill. We're actually so busy sometimes with technology, with mobile phones and laptops, etc., that we aren't given the time to think. Take the time out. Do things differently. Go to that dance show you've wanted. Go and see the Queen film. Go and do something different. Give yourself permission to do it, because your brain then will operate in a very, very different way. So give yourself permission to enjoy things more, take a few breaks, and your brain will certainly work in a very different way. He's the one who called me the BFG in that book. I suppose we're often talked about being the Cinderella subject, are we? And I'm going to finish with another cartoon character in a minute. The one thing I do know about what we do, if we are called the Cinderella sector, is because we're magical. We're deprived of resources, and we do incredible things, and we get incredible outcomes for our students. And I know you're all very, very proud of that. I really want to reinforce the point, though, that we are a membership organisation here to support you. We want to make CREATE as relevant as we can to meet your needs, and we want to make sure at the earliest stages, when your chair of governors or yourselves do feel that there are signs that the pressures of the job and the lack of resources to do it makes it difficult, we involve David and the team at the AoC in order that we can support you. Because we think it's really, really important that we have a pipeline of supply for the future. Somebody said today, and I couldn't agree more, I think it was Richard really, what a privilege it is to be a college principal. I'm in no doubt really, it's the very, very best job. I argue with people like Harry Redknapp in Portsmouth, and I'm a big Pompey fan, who had the best job, and I always said that I did, and I know you believe that as well. I think Carol talked about optimism and hope this morning. We've got to be optimistic, positive and hopeful, no matter what the level of challenge is. The organisation is there to support you, because what we've got to start thinking about are the people who aren't principals in the room or chairs of governors, but are potential and aspiring people that we want to be our leaders of the future. And we've really got to make sure that we support them, and there are supportive programmes in place to do it. But we've still got more work to do. We made a fantastic job, and how inspirational was that petition from those students at Brockenhurst? I think it was one of the transformational things, along with what the team here did. But to have only 67,000 signatures is actually quite disappointing when there are over 100,000 employees in the sector. One of the things I would really urge you all to do really is to see if we can do more. If we trigger the 100,000, it really will make a difference. If we support you with that targeted programme with the MPs that have contact with Treasury and also ministers in particularly marginal seats, we can do more. So what I'm really challenging you to do is to do this really. It is a membership organisation. For the first time, I think many of you decided to make a very proactive and active contribution to the debate. And that was so warming, but we need to still do more. It's difficult, though, with all of the pressures that you're under and that we've heard. But I would urge you to step up. We have got some powerful friends, and one of them is coming this afternoon. Rarely, I think, can we say we're actually really looking forward to someone from Ofsted coming. And that was such a powerful cartoon, because we've also, haven't we, got to use all the other partners that we've got to work with us on this agenda, and particularly Amanda. And Amanda's going to talk about quite, I think, a radical 3 Eyes and the opportunity of that with the new framework later on this afternoon. And I'm sure it'll be worth waiting for, and I'm sure you'll give her a very, very warm reception as well. I did find a page of Anne's speech that she dropped on the way out yesterday, and she was really, really apologetic for missing this out, really. So on her behalf, I really would like to say to you, it's a big omission. It's a really, really big omission, but what she really wanted to say to you is, I'm not going to make the speech that I did. I'd just like to say to you, you're actually awesome. You're actually incredible. You are making such a difference in the communities that you work in to young people, and that would have been enough. And I'll take a few questions, but it didn't quite work out that way, but sometimes things don't, do they really? But there we are. And we need to believe that, like I say, because you are the people who are making the transformational change to young people and your teams and to communities. And without us, the entire system falls over, because we're that linkage between schools and the university sector, schools and employers. And if the middle piece doesn't work, everything suffers. And we do need to be awesome, all of us, and you are. So I'd like to thank you very, very much for that. Teacher recruitment is getting ever more difficult. If we don't believe in the product and we can't sell it to people, who else is going to do it? We have the unique opportunity to grow our own. We're the only sector, actually, that has young people, don't they, from 4 or 5 right the way through to 16 or 18, and we let them go to all the other jobs. We've actually got to try and inspire them to stay in the places that we work in and we love so very, very much. And I'd like to finish with, because there's always questions, and I'm not taking any questions because I'm dashing on a train back to London, but I'm not actually. But I'm not taking any questions. What I'm going to do is answer the one that everybody asks. Is it true, Steve, that Paddington 2 is your favourite film? It actually is. And I'm going to wish you an early Merry Christmas and watch it, because it is the most uplifting Christmas film you can ever see. It's the most uplifting film you can ever see. If you're a Rotten Tomatoes fan, and I wasn't, but I found out, it's the only film ever to have got 5 stars for Rotten Tomatoes. I thought it meant it was really, well, I was going to say the C word, but really awful. But in fact, because it's really, really good. And the thing I like about this little guy is the phrase, if ever you get off at Tottenham Court Road and you walk up to Stedham Place, there's some wonderful quotes from David Bowie on the building site to the right, and there's one from this little guy here. And he says, do you know the wonderful thing about London, but I think it's also the wonderful thing about our sector? Everybody's different, and that means everybody's included. And I'm so proud to work in such an inclusive organisation. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Steve. Thanks, Steve. I've never seen anyone talk about Paddington 2 at the end of a keynote session, so that's a first, isn't it? And probably coming on with a hat as well. This session now is all about driving transformation and economic transformation. It's about the relationship between colleges and employers, the relationship that unions have with colleges, and how we get that right. We know, don't we, that we've been berated, I think, actually, for many years, saying the system isn't demand-led enough. You remember that phrase? You know, what we need is employers in the driving seat. We need to get into more employers. We did a survey a few years ago that said every college has, on average, 600 relationships with employers. Every time I use that statistic in Whitehall, people literally take a double take. They don't believe it. But it is true. That was about 3 years ago. We think the number will have gone up since then. But somehow, for some reason, people don't believe that the relationship between colleges and employers is working. I think that's because of definition. I think it's because employers have unrealistic expectations often. I think it's because employers often think that colleges should just be producing perfectly rounded young people who are absolutely ready for every job that they've got. And I don't think that's realistic. I don't think that's right. So I think the relationship that we need to foster between colleges and employers is really, really important. I don't think we've got that right. I think we need to do more on it. But I also think there's a challenge that we need to give to employers to say, well, what can you do to help make that relationship work more powerfully and better for both employer and student? And I'm really keen that we engage the unions on this as well, to make sure that they play their part, because skills and productivity and pay for unions is really, really important. So we've got a fantastic panel who I'm going to invite on in a minute. The panel is John Cope, Paul Novak, Cindy Rampersad and John Guthrie. As they come on, we're just going to watch a video from Euroskills in Budapest a few weeks ago.
It's fantastic to be here in Budapest, finally, with Team UK. They're ready. They've been working so hard, you know. They've been putting in all the hours, weekends, missed holidays. They're really going to give it their best shot. They're ready to go.
So a fantastic video just to remind us about what skills is all about and the diversity of it, and just how wonderful some of the young people we have in our colleges up and down the country. So just to welcome to the stage, we've got Paul Novak, Deputy General Secretary of the TUC, John Cope, who's Head of Skills at CBI, Cindy Rambasso, who many of you will know, Senior Vice President, BTEC and Apprenticeships from Pearson, and John Guthrie, the Employment and Policy Advisor from UK Hospitality. So we've got a session now where each of the panel are going to spend a few minutes just talking around the issue. There's plenty to talk about. I suspect hospitality and Brexit might come up at some point. I suspect there'll be some complaints about colleges not quite getting industry, John, perhaps. You know, I think there will be all sorts of opportunities that unions offer us. And Cindy's got fantastic experience working across the country with hundreds of colleges over many years. So we're going to start, I think, with John Cope to say a few words. John.
Thank you so much, David. Well, it's fantastic to be here and to speak on a sort of employer view. And not only that, to sort of reflect on the 40 colleges or so and 80 universities that are actually CBI members. So the CBI itself is sort of a microcosm of this partnership between education and business. Any conversation you have with employers, you'll soon get onto the topic of education and skills. It's not only the #1 driver of productivity, but it's also essential social justice and a fairer society. Two things that, in my experience, business values equally. So I wanted to talk today a little bit about the UK skills picture, and where better to look than the CBI annual survey of its members on education and skills that we do in partnership with Pearson. This year's represents about 28,000 employers, so a really good sense check of what's going on. And there were a few messages that jumped out to me that were important for today's conversation. First, an optimistic note. Employers, those surveyed, actually predict that they will be taking on more people over the next 5 to 10 years at a higher level of skills. So not only will they be hiring more people, they also plan to spend more on training. And actually we had the most optimistic survey results on these two measures since 2014. So lots of room for optimism. But that was tinged a little bit of a reality check. Despite that optimism about wanting to take more people on and spend more on training, actually businesses were less confident about filling those gaps. Second, we got a good picture actually of what employers mean by the word skills. I think it's a bit of a lazy term almost. It sort of covers everything and used to capture everything. But what came really clear in the survey was 3 things that come under the skills umbrella that employers value. First is qualifications. There's no escape from that. Qualifications are an important part of education and skills. But just as importantly, actually, was the ability to apply that knowledge, apply those qualifications, to actually use that knowledge. And then third was behaviours and aptitudes. Not qualifications, not technical education, but actually creativity, leadership, working as a team. These things were viewed just as valuable as qualifications. And a lot of the reason for that, I imagine, actually, will be the impact of automation AI that is happening as part of the Fourth Industrial Revolution. Actually, creativity, leadership, teamwork, these are things that are the hardest to replace by AI and automation. Third was continued frustrations, actually, with the apprenticeship levy. There was a frightening statistic in the survey. About 25% of those surveyed were actually writing off the levy as a tax, and disengaged with it entirely as a skills policy. That's something that has to change. And the government, a good step forward in the budget, announced a package of approaching £700 million worth, actually, of new flexibilities, of new support for employers, and getting rid of bureaucracy and things in the way to actually try and get employers confident in the levy so it becomes much more effective. And then finally, actually was about engagement and partnerships, which David touched on in his introductory remarks. Again, there was a lot of room for optimism. There was more enthusiasm than ever from employers to get more involved in schools and colleges and universities. But most frustrating of all, despite that greater enthusiasm, the number of engagements had actually fallen. Something I think the CBI has a good role in actually trying to bring those two conflicting things together. So I'll just finish off actually by saying, responding I suppose to your comment, David, about employers needing to be in the driving seat. I'd actually probably better describe it as a partnership. and not just employers and educators. You know, this is a partnership between unions, employers, educators, policymakers, government, to try and address the skills gaps and the changing labour market. And you know, to round off with what I started with, the cost of not addressing all these challenges is just too high, and we can't not do it. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks, John. Paul, over to you.
Okay, well, thanks, David, and thanks for the opportunity to say a few words. Maybe just to start by carrying on from where your president left off, really, by paying tribute to the work that colleges do up and down the country, but in particular the 120,000 staff who work in the sector, many of whom will be union members. I mean, it's no secret, and you've been discussing it over the last few days, the pressures that the sector's been under over the last few years, cuts to funding, which in turn have had impacts on numbers of jobs, on pay and pensions, on patterns of employment and so on. But I think despite all of those pressures, it's worthwhile taking time out to celebrate the fact that over 2.2 million people are still being supported by your colleges each and every single year. At the TUC and in our unions, we're big fans of further education. We do, to borrow your strapline, love our colleges. And we love them because they play a really important part in terms of making sure we've got the right sort of economy and the right sort of skills in the economy, because they also make a big difference to individuals and to working people generally, and giving people often that second chance to move on and to progress in their, not just their career, but in their lives as well. Maybe just 3 points from me, David, to kickstart the conversation in terms of skills and business. First point is this, from the TUC's point of view, there's no doubt that the UK has to raise its game on skills. We've seen some progress in recent years, but we know that there are big fundamental problems that remain. So not only do we have shortages in some of our key sort of technical and intermediate skills, we know that there are still far too many people struggling with some of those basic skills around English, around maths, increasingly digital skills, and that has an impact obviously on individuals, but it also has an impact on the economy. I can think it's a big contributor to the UK's productivity gap. And we face all of that against the backdrop of real emerging pressures. And I won't be the first person who's mentioned Brexit during the course of the last couple of days, but we don't know what the final shape of the deal will look like. That will certainly have a big impact on the UK's labour market, undoubtedly, as will automation and digitalisation, and what that will mean in terms of the impact potentially on employment and people being able to be equipped to deal with those challenges. Now, we think the government's taken a couple of steps forward in the right direction. John mentioned the apprenticeship levy. I think particularly with those flexibilities talked about in the budget, we think it's got an important role to play, as does the new National Retraining Partnership and Scheme that the CBI and the TUC are working on developing with the DFE. But I think my fundamental point would be this: if the government is serious about further education and is serious about vocational skills, then it has to be serious about funding the sector as well. And a good starting point would be reversing the cuts that we've seen over the past few years. You can't take 45% funding out of adult education and not have an impact on the service provided, and you can't take 30% out of colleges and not have an impact on the sector. So, skills can't be done on the cheap, I suppose, is what I'm saying. Second point is this, and follows on from John's remarks. I think employers have to do more to raise their game on skills. We know there are good employers out there who do invest in their staff, do invest in training and skills, but we know also that there are far too many businesses who don't really commit to developing what they regard as quite often their biggest asset, which is their staff. And I think a recent report by the IPPR found that employer investment in vocational training is around about half the EU average. We know that spending on training fell significantly after the financial crash, and we know that a third of companies provide no training at all to their staff, and that's just not good enough, and we have to address that. So I think employers have to raise their game. Government has to take action to encourage them to raise their game, and not just in terms of issues around things like funding. I think it throws up big questions about the increasingly fragmented nature of employment, what that means in terms of people being able to access skills and support and so on. So that's maybe the second point. And the final point, and you're not going to be surprised that the bloke from the TUC says this, I think there's an important role for the trade union movement to play here, and my message to everybody in the room would be involve us, engage us and challenge us to play that role. I think we do some really good work in terms of things like apprenticeships, working with employers to design apprenticeship schemes, supporting people through apprenticeships. Do really good work in reaching out to some of those people who've traditionally been hard to engage in skills and training. Particular plug for the work that we've done through Union Learn. 230,000 people each year access new skills, training, development opportunities through Union Learn, supported by government, supported by employers, but quite often the people that we can't, I suppose the crucial thing and the difference that unions make is that you can't do skills to people. You have to involve them, and they want to be, have to want to be engaged. So I think unions got a really important part to play in the partnerships that have been talked about. So, investment in the sector, employers raising their game, building genuine partnerships. I think that's the three things I'd start the conversation off with.
Brilliant. Thanks, Paul. Cindy.
So I'd like to start by saying, actually, I think the sector already does an amazing job at supporting economic growth up and down the country. I saw real examples of excellence when I was working as part of Richard Atkin's team with the Commissioner. But actually, I've also reflected on my career, and those of you that know me know that I spent the bulk of my career working in the media industry. And I worked for big multinationals. And when I look back at those companies, many of the people who worked in them, sort of 70% of them, actually went through a college and they had a vocational pathway. And they were adding real value to their own lives, but also to the business and their local community. So I think it's really important that we don't underestimate the value that this sector already provides. And we need to shout louder about it, which is why I think the Love Our Colleges campaign is just a fantastic initiative. I think the really important point, though, in terms of economic transformation is how FE evolves and what the future is going to look like. And I think the impact of technology is significant. We all know that. We know what technology has meant for our lives now, but it's exponential, that rate of growth. And we're seeing industries transformed. And, when I think about when I graduated, or when some of you graduated, roles like app developers and cloud architects and sustainability analysts and the data engineers who know what we're going to buy before we know what we're going to buy, they didn't exist. And the pace of change of those roles evolving, I think, will be even faster. So I think the really important role for FE going forward is how do we embed that culture of lifelong learning and make sure that we're able to prepare people with the right skills at the beginning, at 16 to 18, so that actually they're able to transfer and adapt and be able to have multiple careers, which I think is something that certainly the Future of Skills and Employment report talks about. I think when we look at employers and the role of employers, I think many employers do work with colleges. I think there are some barriers, and I think some of the barriers are around language. I came into education 8 years ago. It really, really is a different language. So we need to kind of think about translation. I think the other bit is bringing employers closer to understanding the design of curriculum and assessments is going to be important, and thinking about how technology can support that going forward. But I also think there's a really important role around careers advice and guidance, and actually helping to, I guess, direct our young people from very early on in terms of what's happening in the external environment. So for me, the role of FE going forward is how does it anticipate and respond, and how do all of the stakeholders, government, educators, businesses, work to make sure that actually what we're developing in our education system is preparing us for the future, us and our young people. We recently sponsored a piece of work, as I'm sure many of you are aware, a commission looking at the future of life work and sustainable learning, which Neil Carmichael chaired. And one of the things that has come out is that we're very focused on exams as a country, actually. But actually, there are different ways of measuring success. And the need to embed those soft skills that John talked about is really crucial if people are able to adapt and step on and step off throughout their working lives. What that commission does show, and actually it gets released on the 12th of December, we're hoping, is if we could get it right in terms of what the vocational landscape and skills landscape look like, and what we deliver, and that includes the funding, the design, the kind of collaboration between employers and educators, it could add 20 billion to our economy. That's just under a third of what we spend a year, or the DFE spends a year on education. So there's a big prize here, and John alluded to that, to be gained. But I do think the role around economic transformation is about the future and what are those future roles going to be and how do we prepare young people for success in their lives and careers in the future.
Thanks, Lindy. And John.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. I think I'd like to kick off by mentioning a report that came out a few months ago. I think it was the House of Lords Economic Affairs Committee, which looked at the world of sort of post-18 education and made quite a contrast between the fortunes of the FE sector and the fortunes of the higher education sector. And it was a damning criticism of this country's obsession with sending children to university, really stating that tens and tens of thousands of young people don't need to go to university each year. In fact, they shouldn't. It's the worst thing that could happen to them. And they leave with an average of 45 to 50,000 pounds worth of debt. And it was really castigating politicians of all parties for a miserable failure in public policy. So that really actually made an impact on me reading through that report, because very often with House of Lords reports, they're less party partisan and you just get the benefit of the participants' huge experience of life. So that's one thought I'd like to leave you with. The second thought is the Conservative government are promoting something called an industrial strategy, something that you would ordinarily have expected to have been promoted by a Labour government. And hopefully that shows a future level of bipartisanship in this whole space, the bringing together of trade unions, employers and government to really get behind those sectors of the economy that will provide the jobs and the prosperity that we need. Third, we now come on to Brexit and to try and link all of these things together in terms of how it affects the hospitality industry, or hospitality and tourism. Pretty clear that Brexit, is it pretty clear that Brexit's going to happen? That freedom of movement is going to end after the end of the transitional period, but we don't know how long the transitional period is going to be for. But cutting all that out for a moment, imagining a world in which political parties operate a different immigration framework, and to cut to the chase, far fewer EU nationals coming into this country to work in industries like hospitality, tourism, food processing, etc. Now, linking the House of Lords, the industrial strategy, and the Brexit employment agenda leads us to something called sector deals, where the government is highlighting and choosing those sectors. And one of those will, we hope, be tourism. And the way I can envisage it working is that we need a relationship between the hospitality industry and the colleges really on two levels. The first level has been the long-standing and traditional level, the local partnership between a local college and local employers. It works well, it works better in some areas than in others, but it's a relationship that we all know and we all understand. What we haven't had in the past, and I think we urgently need it for the future, is to bring together the national level partnership. And one of the difficulties in hospitality and tourism has been the fact that it literally has got hundreds of thousands of businesses. It hasn't got hundreds of thousands of trade associations, perhaps tens of thousands, but it's got too many. But the idea would be that the sector deal will embrace a new way of working. And we do need the national level partnership with the colleges, because I think if the colleges were to look at it in this sense, that I think you and I, our industry, I should say, have got one thing in common. For different reasons, we don't feel that our contribution to society and the economy more broadly is sufficiently valued. You zero in on the issue about funding. I don't need to comment about your frustration over funding. And we don't feel that the value of hospitality and tourism to the economy and society is sufficiently appreciated. I think if we work together more effectively at the national level, then we might be supporting your campaign for funding indirectly, and you might be supporting our campaign for greater recognition of its economic and social contribution. So I think this new dialogue, this new way of working has been occasioned by Brexit, which is a massive rupture to our economy, the effects of which we don't fully understand and won't understand for a number of years. But I think whatever might be our views about Brexit, we do have to recognise that almost certainly it's going to happen and that it will create the need for new partnerships and a genuinely new approach to the way we work together.
Thanks, John. So thank you very much for all that. Lots and lots in there. If there are any questions from the audience, please do indicate. I just want to kind of kick off because it seems to me that one of the themes that came through quite strongly is this sense of the different opinions and views about skills and so on. And so, John, you talked about understanding what we mean by the term skills. And Cindy, you talked a bit about the language difficulties and barriers. And I just wonder if we need to start getting a bit more realism about what employers can expect from colleges and from students, and to talk a little bit more about what employers are actually looking for. Because it seems to me we've had a period, sort of an unprecedented period actually, where the labour market has been able to find people who are almost job ready, who don't need a lot of development once they join an employer, because it's been an incredibly open labour market. You know, the skills have come in and been imported, if you like. And if that's gone, you know, what is it that we should expect from colleges and from their students? I don't know, John, if you wanted to...
Yeah, I suppose the exam question of this then is what does it mean to be work ready? Which is a really hard question to answer. And you get a different answer depending on what sector you go into, what size of business, what part of the country you ask that question. And you're also right to raise the question of what's it reasonable to expect at different levels. So one of the oddities and some of the odd phrases that you hear is sort of maybe someone saying a young person at 15, 16 entering the workplace doesn't understand how an office works and they're not work ready. And you sort of think, well, they've probably not been in an office before. It's probably not reasonable to actually expect that. Actually, that is probably a reasonable expectation on the employer as part of their induction and onboarding process to explain what a photocopier is and how you work in an office. But actually at 21, when you're leaving university or any other form of training, it actually probably is more reasonable to expect you to understand how these things work. So I think there's absolutely a role, and the CBI will be working on this over the next sort of 3 or 4 months to actually try and answer that question, what does it mean to be work ready, and try and bottom it out. Because to your point as well about sort of, I mentioned creativity and leadership and teamwork, and actually those in themselves are also lazy terms, because actually to be creative in accountancy is very different to being creative in any
Colleges
other
are very
part.
good at it, actually.
Indeed.
They've had to be. But,
So actually, you know, sort of delving really deep and sort of realising it's an incredibly complex question, and then trying to sort of work out what's reasonable is incredibly important.
Cindy, do you?
I think it's interesting that more organisations and businesses are looking at aptitude rather than technical skills. So I think going back to this point about the design of curriculum and assessment and really building those skills around creativity, critical thinking. I always say that in my time at City and Islington, when I did my leaving speech, the one thing that I talked about learning was the power of enrichment. So all of those kind of activities that really help people develop, you know, how to be part of a team, how to problem solve, how to kind of have critical thinking. And I think businesses are looking at those aptitudes, and that's what they need, that's what they can mould, and particularly because jobs are changing. So, you know, and it's interesting that a photocopier might not be the norm, because what you do is you do a PDF email to yourself or whatever it is we do now. So I think it's about understanding that. I think we also need to have a think about what we mean when we describe businesses. So if you look at, I went to see Black Panther, like many people probably did at the beginning of the year, and 3,000 people worked on that film. So you had big global organizations working on it, but also SMEs and freelancers. So I also think it's about how we prepare people to work in that kind of ecosystem, and it's not the traditional sense of what a business is. The third thing I'd like to kind of comment on this bit actually is the word skills. I think we need to do a bit more myth busting around the word skills. I think if you ask somebody what pops into their head when you ask, you know, what is a skilled worker, it'll still be the kind of hard hat, the mechanic. But actually, doctors are incredibly skilled. Care workers are incredibly skilled. So I think we need to kind of challenge what we mean by skills. And it is about those softer human kind of transferable skills that prepare people to be successful in their lives. And that also includes jobs. But I think it's complex. I don't think it's just about employers or traditional employers. We need to look beyond that.
I mean, I get a little bit frustrated when in some of these debates around sort of young people being work ready. I mean, I don't think there's ever been a generation that young people have left school or college or university and they've been work ready. And if I think back to my dad was an apprentice welder, worked in English Electric in Liverpool. You didn't turn up at work at 16 and people had expectation that you were going to be work ready. Part of your apprenticeship was not just learning the technical skill, it was learning about what it was like to be at work and what the norm was and the expectation that you were going to be there on time and so on. I think it's also important to remember that not everybody has the same personal circumstances. I've got a 20-year-old son who's in the third year of a joinery apprenticeship, and I can guarantee you every morning at 6:30 in the morning, either me or his mum are banging on the door saying, come on, you've got to get out, and he's on site at 8 o'clock in the morning. Now, there'll be other kids who are in a similar situation who haven't got the person knocking on the door making sure they're out, and it's not because he's got a better aptitude or a better personality or he's more go-getting. It's the fact he's in a set of family circumstances which mean that we're making sure he's out and he's going to work and, you know, holding him to account even before he goes out. So I do think we have to bear in mind people's personal circumstances, and I suppose then we also go back to this thing about, you know, this doesn't begin and end the moment you leave college or university or school. I mean, we know, and I think Cindy made the point, that people are going to have to develop their skills right throughout their working lives. I'm really interested in things like we've, you know, talked about things like midlife career reviews, because careers advice in this country, I think, is almost at a crisis point. But it's, what advice there is always focused on people who are leaving school, leaving college, leaving university. And actually, sometimes it's the second job or the third job, or you get to your mid-20s or your early 30s and you think, maybe I'll do something else. And it's no use your college is providing those potential opportunities for people to retrain and skill if there's nobody signposting and supporting people to take advantage of those opportunities.
So John, you talked a bit about the perceptions of all of this, and I think it's really important. I remember sitting at dinner quite a few years ago next to the a managing director of one of the British Telecom big business units, and it was a minister. I can't remember which minister it was. We've had so many over the years, and we were sitting there, and the minister was asking all these business leaders what they thought of apprenticeships and skills, and this guy said, well, you know, Minister, what we have to do is we have to bring back apprenticeships because it's appalling that there are no apprenticeships in this country. The night before, I'd been sitting on the British Telecom table at the National Apprenticeship Awards dinner when they won Large Employer Apprenticeship Employer of the Year. So from BT, from BT, the one guy who was very senior didn't believe they were doing it. I think they had about 2,000 apprenticeships. You know, there's something for me about how we turn this around. So we keep talking about the problems as if the glass is half empty. What can we do to turn it around to start talking about the good things that are happening? You know, the hundreds and thousands of examples that there are, the good employers that are investing, and try and talk it up a bit more, and perhaps do that in the hospitality industry.
It's about 18 months ago, I found myself in front of one of the select committees looking at Brexit. And I think I startled the people in the room when I said, look, the fact is we have got hundreds and hundreds of thousands of young people working in our industry that are fantastic. That's the truth. We couldn't function as an industry without them. It was only 5 years ago, now 6 years ago, that this country showcased to the world what a fantastic country we are when it comes to hospitality. It was called the Olympics. I mean, it was absolutely, fantastic in terms of the hospitality we displayed to the world, and it was done overwhelmingly by British people, of which young people were the majority. So we've got to recognise, I think our great strengths. The problem that I think needs to be overcome, if you put aside the lack of bipartisanship in the space of vocational education, I mean, it's no accident that continental European countries don't have a problem with hospitality recruitment. They don't have a problem in Germany or Austria or Switzerland, for example. And the reason is that there's been a bipartisan approach to vocational education in those societies for decades. And hospitality in Germany and Austria is seen as a profession. And that's something that we want to get to. I think for industry, industrial leaders, one of the problems is that because of the government's own bias over decades, A-levels in university, they can understand. And let's face it, most managing directors and owners of capital have children who take A-levels and go to university. And the vocational space, which you think ought to be simpler, is just the most horrendous mix of acronyms and confusion and different funding rules and formula and layouts and progression paths and journeys and opportunities and lifelong and adult and flexible. It's just amazingly complex to distill into an understandable form. The two things that I think need to be our key watchwords is that there's a fundamental difference between skill and attitude. And attitude is not just down to the college, it's the person's experience of life, their upbringing, the environment they live in, their experience at school, college, and the workplace. Skill can be more accurately defined, but attitude is something that comes with the right attitude from lots of other people.
Paul?
Yeah, just to pick up actually a couple of points, John. One, it's not just most business leaders who are sending their kids through A-levels and universities. It's the same for a lot of our politicians as well, which is, I think, sometimes why FE falls right down the education sort of radar, if you like. But really interesting your point, John, about the potential of the industrial strategy and sector councils and the sector deals, because here is an opportunity, isn't it, to try and join up government policy. So you've got a commitment to support for sector councils and sector deals, the apprenticeship levy, the potential around sort of thinking about T-levels, your sector in particular. And I think if you can bring together those partnerships, which is like, can we agree in hospitality, in retail, in private social care, the need for us to drive up employment standards, the need for us to drive up productivity, to give people new opportunities. Exactly that sort of partnership approach that John was describing, I think, is really important. It will require investment, and one of the frustrations for me, I think it's great that the government's industrial strategy will support investment in research and development in life sciences and in aerospace. Rightly, it should. But where's the investment in sector like hospitality, where it might not be investment in R&D, but it is about investment in people, because that's what's going to drive real improvements in that industry, make it a destination of choice for young people, and make it seen as a profession and the potential for career progression.
So a quick comment, Cindy, and then John.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the Love Our Colleges, I kind of mentioned it earlier, is a great initiative. I think we need to increasingly get employers to talk about the value of people who are working in their organisations to them, and speak up and be the voice of vocational education. I also think we need to kind of challenge what we mean by vocational education. So I'm one of those accountants. I trained as an accountant. And accountancy is a vocation, as is being a doctor. So I think we need to start almost using the language across different professions and start breaking down the barriers, because actually it's not about the word vocational. Ultimately, it becomes about social economic background and class, and we need to challenge that. And I think employers can play a really key role in advocating and championing the people in their organisations who went through colleges, making huge contributions and are succeeding, because because I think that's the voice that will be heard the most, and the kind of economic impact that this sector has.
John, just a quick word.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like all the pieces of the puzzle are there. You have enthusiastic employers, as I mentioned earlier, as part of our surveys, which want to get more involved in education and see it as a priority. Business spends about £44 billion a year on education and training. It's more than the DfE spends on schools. But actually breaking down those barriers that you mentioned is so important. Another barrier that I would think is sort of artificial is actually FE and HE. You know, a lot of colleges, and I'm sure David will correct me if I'm wrong, but I think 10% of HE is delivered in colleges. And universities deliver skills and further education. I mean, becoming a doctor, if you look at what a doctor degree it looks like, it's actually really an apprenticeship. It's on-the-job training, and it's technical. So these barriers are artificial. So you've got employers spending money, you have enthusiasm, you have a government that says that it completely backs skills and education is up for it, and you have world-class universities and colleges. But I think the one thing that's missing is coherence. Actually, at 14, it is possible as a young person to start going off into a UTC, to a university, technical college, and start to involve more specialisation into more technical vocational education. And yet, if you ask someone at that age, how would you get to a level 8 technical qualification, even if they talk to their parents and their careers advisor, they probably wouldn't know. And yet they would probably be able to describe to you how they get to a PhD. It's so ingrained. Everyone knows you do GCSEs, A-levels, masters, bachelor's, PhD, whatever. So trying to bring that coherence and the bridges and ladders that actually create a system where you can do academic and technical. You don't have to choose. And that if you start down a technical route, you think, actually, this is not for me, you can go back and do an academic qualification. So the first step for me in bringing that coherence, and Paul mentioned it already, is T-levels. To actually create that level 3 equivalent to A-levels that's technical, high quality, prestigious, that parents, employers, whoever actually wants people to go for, and it's a credible qualification is so important, given it gives a pedestal to BTECs and MVQs or whatever it may be, but it brings that coherence. And once you've got the level 3, you can then start bringing coherence to the next steps and work your way up.
So we've run out of time. We all agree on one thing. The government needs to invest more in skills. You're our partners in this. We need your help. We've got college leaders here who would love you to say what you're going to do to help us win some money in the CSR. Not for them, actually, but for the work they do to support people to get the jobs and the skills and so on. So 20 seconds each only. What would you do to help us, Paul?
I mean, I think we'll carry on making the case for investment in further education. And, you know, it's not going to surprise you to say, I think there's a particular issue about staff pay and about attracting the right people into the sector and then getting them to stay. I mean, I said to you, David, beforehand, I mean, going back to my son's example, you can work more, you can earn more on a building site as a joiner than you can teaching a joinery course at a local college. And you've got to make colleges attractive places to work, that people get a sense that they're valued and rewarded. Pay is one part of that. It's not the only part of that, but I think love our colleges, but love our staff in the colleges with delivering the service.
Thank you, John. 20 seconds only.
The most frustrating part of my job is going into colleges, schools, universities and saying, I can't get to talk to employers, they won't listen to me. And then having the same conversation with employers, say, I've approached a school or college, university, and they've ignored me. So I think for me, actually the CBI in the middle, as a brokerage, trying to make these two groups talk and achieve the same thing.
Brilliant. Cindy?
I think it's working with employers and educators to make sure that we've got the right content assessment and that we're evolving it so that it's relevant for the future. And that for me includes supporting an academic pathway and the T-levels, but also recognising the huge benefit from existing qualifications at the moment, including applied generals.
Thank you. And John, final words, 20 seconds.
I'd like the government to outline an absolutely compellingly clear vocational pathway, and I'd like somebody in the government to explain to me exactly how T-levels and apprenticeships sit alongside each other. That's number one. And number two, I would like the industry to recognise that the hospitality and tourism succeeds in local areas. That could be a city, it could be a coastal community, but every single local area will be serviced by an FE college, and we have to build that partnership at local level.
Super. Thank you very much. Can we say thank you to the panel? we're going to move on. We've been talking a lot about the problems of today and the challenges of the last 10 years. We've also talked a lot about the spending review, which is going to happen next year. It's going to influence funding from 2020 for 2 or 3 years. But we're now going to go to a kind of different plane and a different space, really. We've got Tom Cheesewright, who is a futurologist, if that's actually a word. He's done a lot of work on looking at the future and about how the future is going to pan out, and does work on strategy for organisations to help them cope. So if we can welcome Tom Cheesewright to the stage, please.
Hello. Oh, good, you're still awake. So yeah, as the screen says, I'm a speaker, a writer, a consultant, and a futurist. So if nothing else, you can go back to your colleges and tell your students there is a new career available. You too can be a futurist. It is a genuine job, and people actually pay me to do it. What does it mean? It means I work with organisations around the world, some big companies, Barclays and HSBC, everything from booze to banking, I like to say, to help them to answer 3 questions. First of all, what does our future look like? And secondly, how do we tell that story? There's no point having a view of the future if you can't convince your staff, your students, your board, your stakeholders of what that future looks like. And thirdly, what on earth do we do about it? That's the tricky bit. It's great fun looking to the future. Sometimes it's really frivolous. I get called up and people ask me, all those things we saw in Back to the Future, are they realistic? Are they going to come true? And sometimes it's really, really serious. Working with organisations, local authorities who've just had a big shock and want to make sure that the next time a big shock comes along, they're ready for it. And I'm busy at the moment. It seems at the moment everyone wants to know about the future. And why is that? Well, you've heard a couple of times today. You heard from Eddie Obeng about this idea of accelerated change, that change is happening fast now. Can I do a quick poll? If I can see all of you up in the stands there. Who feels like change is happening faster now? That's the usual, about 90%. And it's a common theme. Lots of us feel like change is happening faster, like our heads are spinning. And it's true of you in colleges, it's true of the chief execs of companies, it's true of boards, it's true of people in the street. And so everyone's asking the question, what's next? What's coming? How can I see the future? And that's the question that I try and answer. But answering that question is really about understanding change. It's understanding what's coming. It's understanding what drives change, what's going to get us from here to there. Why are things changing faster now, if they really are? And I'm really excited to be here because, as I'll say towards the end of my presentation, I keep coming back to the same answer when people ask about change and what should we do about change. The answer almost invariably comes back to education. But first, we have to start explaining this idea, this feeling, this sense that we all have, and excuse me, I'm going to grab some water, that change is happening faster now. Because if you ask a historian, they'll poo-poo this idea. There's all these technologists, people like Ray Kurzweil, the chief futurist for Google, who tell this story of change getting faster and faster and faster. They point to things like Moore's Law. Are you familiar with Moore's Law? So 50-ish years ago, the co-founder of Intel noticed that the number of transistors you can economically fit on a silicon chip is doubling every 2 years. Or to you and I, the bang for buck we get out of a computer doubles every 2 years. In fact, so does the speed of connection we can get from a mobile device. So does the amount of storage we can get for £1. And these things have knock-on effects. They've transformed all sorts of industries, from retail to medicine. And they keep going on this exponential curve. Things keep getting faster and faster and faster. But you put this to the historians and they say, hold on a second. You think change is happening fast now? Go and look back at the Industrial Revolution. Go and look back at the shift from the horse and cart to the car. Go and look back at the advent of the washing machine. Think about the scale of impact of the washing machine and domestic automation. You rewind 5 generations, we used to spend an average of 63 hours a week on domestic labour. And when I say we, let's be clear, it's roughly 1/2 of the population who was doing most of that work. 63 hours a week. If you're doing 63 hours a week, there's no opportunity to come into the workforce. There's no leisure industry to be built up around you. That's far more than a full-time job. One of the first projects I did as a futurist about 5-6 years ago was with LG, and we looked at how that number has changed. We found that if you fast forward to the current generation, people spend somewhere between 2 and 18 hours a week on domestic labour. And that shift, that cutting by somewhere between a factor of 4 and 10 of the amount of time we spend on domestic labour, has had a dramatic impact on all of us. It's enabled the creation of this leisure industry, some of that hospitality that John was just talking about. It's released people into the workforce. It's played a direct role in women's liberation. This was a massive scale change, a huge order of magnitude change, but it took a long time. It started back in the 1920s in the US, in the 1950s in Europe. It took decades. And this is the sort of change we're used to. Whether it is industrial revolutions, whether it is the shift from the horse and cart to the car. Large-scale change that transforms our cities, our lives, our relationships, shopping, culture, society. Great big changes that happen over decades. What you might call low-frequency change. I believe what we're experiencing now is what I call high-frequency change. I don't believe that change overall is accelerating, and that the grand arc of history has somehow put its foot down and is moving faster. But I believe that thanks to new technologies, that accelerated communication, our shrunken world, our globalized markets, we're experiencing high-frequency change now. I like to think of all change as happening in waves. And what's disrupting our industries now, what's disrupting our markets, what's disrupting the companies that I work with, is high-frequency change. Smaller changes, ones that might only affect a single industry, a single company, but happen at an incredibly accelerated rate. I'll give you an example, starting with Justin Bieber. Might be an unusual place to start. But back in 2015, Justin Bieber was witnessed on Instagram rolling around his green room on a hoverboard. Anybody buy a hoverboard for their child, nephew, niece, themselves? You can admit it. March, April 2015, these things are huge, and they're $2,000 a pop. They're a celebrity toy. But within 3 months, you can pick one up on a market stall in Birmingham for £250. The Chinese manufacturers have ramped up. The importers have cottoned on. Volumes have increased. And people have started to build businesses around the hoverboard. Import businesses, serving businesses, servicing businesses, repair, retail. And then 3 months later, 2 things happen. Number one, the Department of Transport says, you do know you can't legally ride these anywhere. Unless you are landed gentry, it's kind of pointless having one. You can't ride it on the street, you can't ride it on the pavement, you can't ride it in a park. And then 2 of them explode and burn someone's house down. Never great for marketing. Instead of this long, decades-long change, we had this 6-month hype cycle, a whole industry, family-owned factories built up and collapsed in China in this 6 months. Retailers and servicing companies in the UK built up and collapsed in 6 months. Major retailers lost chunks of money when they started to invest in these things and demand collapse. Although it's a frivolous example, it's a good example of the nature of the change we're facing today. And that change has effects. It's that sort of change that my clients are mostly worried about. And it's that sort of change that you're going to be training people to deal with in the future. And it's that sort of change that drives statistics like this. This is 4 different forecasts of the effects of automation on jobs between now and 2030. Jobs that could be automated, handed over to machines, whether those jobs are physical roles like bricklaying, or whether they're cognitive roles like a legal assistant or a solicitor. Look at the most conservative number in this list. The most conservative estimate yet of the number of jobs that could disappear to automation over the next 20 years, 10 years, 15 years, somewhere in that range, is the OECD, and it's 14%. Now, there will be new jobs like futurist, but will there be enough new jobs to replace 14% of all work? Will it come? Will those new jobs come in time for 2030? The answer is we don't know, but it seems unlikely to me. We're facing a period of enormous disruption, of traditional roles disappearing, not just in manual work, but in a lot of cognitive work as well. And the industries know this. Professional services industries know this. The construction industry knows this. The finance industry knows this. We employ 1 million people in call centres alone in the UK, and I've seen technology that could replace 80% of them. These are huge waves of disruption coming at a very accelerated rate. And they're going to hit each industry at a different time. In many ways, each one is going to be a single wave that touches industries at different times based on different braking factors. Regulation, the capital cost of getting into those industries, human attitudes and culture. These things are very unpredictable in their effects at slowing these waves down. This presents a really interesting challenge to companies, because there's lots of research going on now about what does a company look like after we've done all this automation. We're all familiar with the classic pyramid, the hierarchy, chief exec, directors, managers, workers, smaller or larger, flatter or taller, ultimately a pyramid. What does that pyramid look like when you start to hand over a lot of the junior roles, particularly, to machines? The Boston Consulting Group has this idea of the rocket ship model. You take the traditional pyramid and you slice off the wings, because the wings are now handed over to machines. The wings are all robots now. Well, how does that work? You have a single pillar. Do you promote everybody all the way up based on time served? We don't have a good answer to that yet. But I think that's the conservative estimate of what could happen. I think it could look more like this. We could end up inverting the human pyramid of workers. A few junior people at the bottom, augmented by or maintaining machines. We've already seen robot bricklayers that allow one person to do the work of 3 people. Artificial intelligence assistants appearing in the professional service industries that completely strip away much of the manual work of moving paper around, of research, of discovery, of fact-checking, of accounting. How do we find these senior people doing the more human roles? Where do they come from? How do they get trained? How are they educated to be able to fulfill those positions? No one has a good answer to this yet, but education is definitely part of it. So we have 3 issues intersecting, 3 pressure points across our economy. This accelerated disruption, rising automation, and a complete uncertainty about what career paths are going to look like when increasingly human beings are augmented by machines in the workplace. And that's before we get into the macroeconomic environment. The B word. No need to say it. How do we address these things? Well, in this context specifically, I think it comes down to a few more specific questions. The question I get asked most often in any presentation, in any context: What do I teach my children for tomorrow's world? How can I create an education for my kids that is future-proof? And when do we teach it, and how do we teach it? And this is a question that was put to me originally by the Institute of Chartered Accountants a few years ago. And it was put appropriately for this context by employers. Employers wanting to feed back to the education market to say, these are the skills we think we will want in the future. And with a working group, we broke it down to a really simple thing we called the 3 C's. Tomorrow's employees, the human ones, will need to be able to do 3 things. Number 1, curate, discover and qualify information. Number 2, create, synthesize something new, the creation of value. Number 3, communicate, sell those ideas to their colleagues and their customers. Curate, create, communicate. If people have those skills, then in many ways the context in which they learn them, the knowledge within which those skills are built, is maybe not irrelevant, but is ephemeral. They're going to be dealing with a world of high-frequency change where they're constantly having to relearn the detailed technical skills. But some core things, thrown back to some ideas that Andreas Schleicher talked about this morning, will be transferable. They will be enduring. And when are they going to learn it? It's not going to be all in one go. It's not going to be at the start of their working lives. If we're facing these waves of high-frequency change, then the things they need to know will not even have been discovered at the point they enter the workplace. And this is already reality today. One of the most important things people are having to learn is how to learn, when to recognize and how to recognize the gaps in their own knowledge and the barriers in their own career and go and find the answers to those problems. I agree with what Andrea said this morning. The degree is a barrier to lifelong learning. We need to accept that education is going to be a whole life enterprise. But I don't want to come at this totally from the position of what employers want from education. Education isn't just about what employers want. It isn't just about someone's economic value. In fact, it can't be now more than ever. Because even if that most conservative estimate of 14% of jobs being automated is right, and heaven forfend, the larger estimates of 47% are right, there will not be a possibility of full employment. We cannot predicate someone's value to society based on their earning potential. There's lots of conversations about universal basic income at the moment, about what are people going to do if they're not going to work. Conversations about 4-day week, very sensible conversations about 4-day week. What are people going to do when they're not working? I think the most valuable answer is learn. We need to go back to a valuing of learning as a strength, as a great thing in its own right, as a contribution to society in its own right, whether or not it has direct economic value. And particularly where that learning helps the rest of us to adapt to this high-frequency change. So I've got a few minutes for questions before I sum up. I've blitzed through all sorts of stuff there. Are there any questions from the audience at that point? Thank you for the likes. Stunned silence. Go on, give me one question. I know David was threatening to do one if you didn't. One at the back there, fantastic.
Thanks. Is there a generational conceit at work here?
Sorry, is there?
A generational conceit at work, that we always think our challenges are different and bigger. Because you harked us back to the Industrial Revolution, and all the people who worked in the horse rearing and care business never possibly having any prospects of economic deployment, but they did.
I think you're absolutely right. I think every generation, just like as we all get older, we all think young people are doing terrible things now and sort of reject their ways as being somehow sort of disruptive and against the historical order. We all think our current generation is experiencing faster change and things doing differently, just like the Victorians thought their age was this age of ultimate sophistication. But I think there is something genuinely different now. As I say, I don't think we can argue, I don't think we can justify this idea that somehow the history is moving more quickly now, that everything is changing faster. I think with the benefit of hindsight, we'll look back at the internet age, the age of the connected computer, as being a change of the same order of magnitude as the Industrial Revolution, but no greater. But I think what we have to acknowledge is that the hyper-connected nature of the world now, the fact that I can access 1,000 suppliers direct from China and have something on my doorstep in a parcel for £1, it does have a dramatic effect on our society. The fact that ideas, whether they are media, whether they are books, whether they are political, can spread across the globe at the speed of light. That does change things. I don't think it changes the grand speed of history, but I do think it gives us this phenomenon of high-frequency change, smaller but disruptive in specific spheres. That answer your question? Thank you. So, I'm on video. Can I get the last slide back? To summarize then, I think we have to accept that knowledge is increasingly ephemeral and that some skills will be transitory. They will only last so long, but there are core skills that we teach people in the context of learning knowledge that are durable and that will endure and that will give human beings a differentiation in an age of machines. The ability to curate, the ability to create, the ability to communicate. And I think we have to reinforce those skills repeatedly throughout life at every point where we help people to relearn the skills they need to progress their career. But we also have to remember that this is not just about earning potential. Not everyone will be earning all the time throughout their working lives anymore. And learning for its own sake has an enormous value and one we increasingly have to treasure in the future society. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Tom. I'm going to get a bit of a reputation for being a flower man, I think. I just want to do one more thank you. We have a fantastic team at AoC who help organise this conference. Every year they pull off, I think, a fantastic event with over 1,200 delegates, over 2 days, with 50 sessions, with loads and loads of fantastic speakers. The team are great, and we'll thank them all personally later. But there's one person who heads it up naturally, and I just wanted to, on stage, invite Shireen to come on and accept these flowers, and for a big round of applause. Well done.
Thank you.
Brilliant
Thanks
job.
very much. Thank you.
Shireen's done a fantastic job, and it's fantastic. She's the sort of person who comes to me just every now and then with a few questions, and they're kind of little questions, just can you answer these ones? And I do, and all of the big questions she's sorted out. So brilliant job. Thank you very much. Well done. So this is the final plenary session. We've got Amanda Spielman later, and please do come to that. I think that's going to be a really interesting session. We've got breakouts in a minute. But I just wanted to say a few words just to kind of wrap up, really. I think it's been a fantastic couple of days. Thank you for your participation. I think the workshops and breakouts I've been in seem to have been very lively. The feedback I've had is very positive. I think we've had some fantastic speakers and some fantastic issues. I just want to reflect back on what I started with yesterday morning. And to me, it feels like about a week ago. I'm not sure about you. We've been through so much together. I talked about 4 Ps. I talked about the need for us to raise our profile, the need to make sure that we do that around excellence and prestige, the need to get into the politics of it, and the need for us, I think, in the longer term, to make sure we're clear about the purpose of colleges within our society and particularly within the education system. I think all of those still stand quite strongly for me. I think we must build on the Love Our Colleges work that we've done. We must get that campaign group going. We must get every college engaged locally and hopefully nationally in making sure that our profile is raised higher and higher than it ever has been before. That campaign we did and the video you're seeing now was a brilliant, brilliant week, but it wasn't enough. We must go on. We've got to raise the prestige of our sector. We must get a reputation for being excellent. The work we did on the ITN Showcase Learning for Life is a really good example of how we can do that. All of you are doing brilliant things with students every day, every week. We need to expose that much more. The third P was politics. We must get into Treasury. I know it didn't go fantastically well for our minister, but I know also that Anne is very, very keen for us to get very targeted in terms of the MPs and the ministers we get to. So we will be coming out to some of you to offer as much support as we can to get your MPs on side, particularly if you've got Treasury ministers or particular people in Parliament who we think can have the most impact. But we also want to do, as well as that targeted work, we want to do much more with you locally to give all of you the confidence to do the things that will make the difference. Making sure we have an impact on the politics of this country is really important. And then finally, we must do some more about purpose. We've done a lot of work with colleges from the Four Nations, and we want to carry that on. We think that if we work across the Four Nations, we have a stronger voice. We think there's so much in common between colleges across the four nations of the UK. And we think that together we can get an impact on Treasury. And together we can start to draw and create that vision for colleges over the next 5 or 10 years. Everything we've done, I think, in the last 48 hours has kind of led us to a point of saying, let's just get on with it and do it. Let's not sort of bow down to the pressure. Let's not get cowed by the fact that it's getting harder. Let's not just walk the tightrope alone. When we're together, united, we're much, much stronger. We've seen that in Love Our Colleges. We've seen that over the last day or two. Let's carry that on and make sure we carry it into the new year, because the spending review, I think, really feels like a make or break for us. I think we have to win some investment in young people, and we have to win something from the post-18 review and investment in that kind of adult space. We must do that, not just for ourselves, but for the communities that we serve. So we've got a massive challenge that I think together we can crack, and I hope that we do. So let's do that. Meanwhile, we're going off to coffee break and refreshment break now. It's in Hall 4 rather than in the exhibition space. So that Hall 4 is where we had the gala dinner last night. There's breakouts after that. And then the Amanda Spillman session starts at 4:10, again back in Hall 4. So please do come to that. Have a great journey home, and I look forward to seeing you all soon. Thank you very much.